resources. Next is the raise hand. Here you are going to raise your hand in case you have to share certain things. Next is the question and answer tab where you are going to submit the questions to the speakers. Kindly mention the name of the speaker, and please do not put the question and answer in the chat box. Rather, put your questions in the question and answer box. Next is we request everyone to keep yourself muted unless they are speaking. In case of any emergency, my colleague, Mr. Dhruv Pasricha, will take over the webinar. And allotted time for each speaker is 20 minutes, and for discussants is 5 to 7 minutes. As we can see the registration statistics, we have crossed over 1100 registrations across 62 countries that is depicted on the map itself. We have more than 1100 registrations across the globe. We have with us a lot of engineers, architects and planners. We have geographers, and they're coming from different organizations. They are government officials, they are academicians, and they are from civil societies. They are consultants also. So Dr. Suresh Kumar Rohila is the Senior Director at the Center of Science and Environment. He is having more than 23 years of experience in the same domain. And he leads the urban water team, and he's also the academic director of the School of Water and Waste at CSC. So will be acting as the moderator for this webinar. So sir, over to you.
Thank you, Nupur, and very warm welcome to all the speakers, discussants, and the participants. I'm very excited and happy to see that always when we do the webinars, we start with whether there would be an audience, and I'm so happy to see 1,000 plus people registered. And first of all, John, thanks for agreeing to be part of this. Ed, thanks for joining at a short notice. Professor Ishrat Islam and John from South Africa, a very warm welcome. I would start this webinar by giving a brief background about Center for Science and Environment and the School of Water and Waste under the initiative of capacity building and building a community of practice across Global South. We are organizing this as a part of series of webinars which we do. I am, as my colleague said, I am the Senior Director at Center for Science and Environment, and I'm also the Academic Director for the School of Water and Waste at CSE. And the School of Water and Waste has been fully operational since last 3 years, and we have partnered globally with top universities, research institutions, governments, central government, state governments, and it has emerged as a teaching, learning, and innovation center that looks into finding appropriate solutions for the key problems in India and Global South. And I would say that we have a community of practice and alumni of 5,000 plus people who are who have been interacting with us over last decade, exploring sustainable and affordable solutions. And today, what we see is that water challenges are one of the top 5 global challenges which are listed. And across the world, there is a water stress which is noted, but few countries have quite a extreme water stress, out of which India is one of the countries, and various other countries are facing water stress. 54% of India faces high to extremely high water stress, and we have a considerable population, which is 377 million people who live in urban centers, and we have million plus cities which are above 50. And what we see is that over the past few years, we have increasing intensity of rainfall and decreasing number of days it rains. This has been noticed in India. And also across global South cities, the changes are being noticed with climate change. One more thing, what happens in city is that the pre and post development, there is increased runoff. And there is impact on the groundwater, that the natural replenishing capacity of surface is reduced and groundwater is depleted. So this is one of the phenomena which is observed. And in India in particular, we see this is reflected in the form of coexistence of problems. One side, there is a shortage of water, and other side, there is plenty of water. We see flooding, which is reported. ESC recently did a quick research of, and we did mapping of these problems across the so-called smart cities in India. We have done the mapping of urban flooding incidences and status of groundwater. You would see on the left side, we have done the mapping of urban flooding incidences, and these are all the smart cities, and red color dots show the number of smart cities over where the urban flooding issues have been reported in last 3 to 4 years. And on the right side, you see the status of groundwater. You would see that the red spots show the overexploited zones, and orange color is the critical, and yellow color is the semi-critical area. So you would see that coexistence of these problems of abundance of also shortage of water, which is there. So CSC has been promoting that we should have an approach of water sensitive cities, whereby we should talk about macro level stormwater harvesting, revival of lakes and ponds, which are part of the nature-based solutions. We should use the open green areas for harvesting stormwater. We should do certainly this should be in addition to the rainwater harvesting at building level and campus level, which has been in practice. But we also say that if there is more which needs to be done for water augmentation, then we should do is treated wastewater reuse for local non-potable water demand management. I think these are the approaches and principles we have been pushing. But what we see in India, as well as this is prevalent and very valid in global south, is that there is a challenge of innovation in the policy and the practice. Also, there is a challenge of the scale at which this change should happen. There is a challenge of the capacity. Even if we say that everything is written in the policies, there is that kind of capacity does not exist to translate those things onto the ground. So CSC has built a program of building capacity across the global south, and we have been doing this research in the area of water management in India, where we found that the water management practices were much different historically, which were documented that different agroclimatic regions used to have different water management practices. Then post-independence, we analyzed and we found that water has delivery of water and provision of water has been institutionalized, and water became business only restricted to utilities or water supply agencies, and it was dominated by only engineers who were responsible for making water supply as a network problem, networks and services problem. However, I, as a head of the Center for Science and Environment Center for Excellence, assisting the government, we have done some review, and we have found that we need to mainstream water sensitive urban design and planning, and we have to mainstream green infrastructure approaches in cities, and we have developed a practitioner's guide for global south cities and India, where we need to promote, we are trying that how practitioners can do decentralized cost effective measures, and we are also building up capacity of real users and real implementers to experiment, build up these small scale projects which need to contribute. What we have done is we have had some success. Odisha is the first state in India to develop and issue the guidelines for water sensitive urban design and planning. We have also we are building an advocacy for utilizing parks and green areas for stormwater harvesting. And we have also recently launched a compendium called CGINS, called Compendium of Green Infrastructure Network Systems, which documents the global best practices. And you would see that you can, at your own time, you can visit this web page and you can have a look at this, where we have put together case studies, and you can also contribute to these case studies. This is a menu of case studies worldwide, which can bring, which at the moment has 73 case studies, 36 global case studies, and 37 Indian case studies. And these case studies can be searched by water bodies, parks and spaces, residential area, institutional area, and with the objective, whether it is a water conservation objective, pollution abatement objective, or flood mitigation. And we have documented if it is a policy level intervention, it's a plan level or a project level, and who owns these projects or who owns these interventions. I think this is a context which I wanted to say that we are involved here in building a community of practice, and I am very happy to introduce a friend and an old contact, Dr. John Matthews, who has been a researcher in the area of addressing the issue that how cities can build resilience in wake of climate change, and to share with us his experience and his learnings that how the global south has to adapt to these urban water issues and challenges which we are facing. John, to you, and if you can take 20 minutes and tell us about the findings, what you are involved with.
Thank you very much, Suresh. And I think I was trying to remember while you were talking, I believe that we've known each other for about 11 years or so, that we met in India, but we've met many other places since then. I'm really grateful to be invited to speak here. I'm very impressed with the work you just shared from CSC, and I'm also very grateful to the audience for joining today. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. My name is John Matthews. I'm speaking to you from North America. I am going to talk today about what our organization and our partners see as the emerging practice of climate resilience, and especially how it applies to ensuring that we have resilient cities. And I'm going to be focusing on thinking about not just climate impacts around water, but really how we're not just responding to impacts, but we're actually also trying to build something forward, trying to think in a more positive, constructive way about how climate change actually may be an opportunity for us to combine an emerging set of issues and bring them together for a positive view of development. And I would say, maybe building on your very last comment, Suresh, it's certainly not just a global South issue. It's very much a global issue. There's no country that's not touched by climate change. And we really need to think very hard about what economic development, what growth, what sustainability looks like as we face ongoing, even accelerating climate change. Just a very quick word about our organization, AGWA. AGWA is the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation. We were founded just over 10 years ago. We're co-chaired by the World Bank and a Swedish NGO called the Stockholm International Water Institute. And we're also, like CSE, a global community of practice. We have a very strong focus on around technical best practices for water and climate change. And we also engage in a lot of policy work. And we span everything from engineering, the sciences, to governance and law, finance and economics, and policy. I'd like to just begin with a quote from a colleague at the World Bank. I think he didn't know that there was someone who wasn't from the World Bank who was in the room when he said this, but I really like this quote. He said, we build things that last 300 years. Why don't we think about sustainability for that long? And I'm very mindful, I've been to South Asia many times, all across South Asia. And it's an ancient societies. It's a very deep sense of history there. This is a landscape that's been actively managed for an incredibly long period. If there's any part of the world that understands about thinking over a long period of time, it must be South Asia. And that's really the challenge that we face right now. We typically, in the water management world for the last 150 or 200 years, we've tried to think over much shorter timescales, especially the last 50 or 60 years. But we're really surrounded by the evidence of long-term active management. And when we think of beyond just 10 or 20 years, we have to think about climate change as one of the primary drivers that we're facing. A city, for instance, lasts a lot longer than 10 or 20 years. A city really needs to last centuries. And sustainability over that scale is a different way of thinking than we have before. In terms of our making processes, particularly for the last century, we've had what's now referred to as a top-down water management approach and decision-making style. We often begin with a very senior decision maker. he or she defines a specific problem or need, often defined quite narrowly, perhaps hands it to an engineer, a planner, an economist, some type of a technical analyst. That person develops often just a single solution, one kind of final approach. That person may or may not include a climate risk assessment, some type of a vulnerability assessment. It's more widespread now, but still emerging. And then this is presented to users and stakeholders, to the citizens of a city or a broader urban landscape. And often we as citizens are told to take it or leave it. There's a widespread dissatisfaction with this, especially in societies where we value democratic solutions, democratic approaches. That users and stakeholders need to be involved earlier in the process. And then one of the terms of art of the climate change era, non-stationarity, is also really critical here. Climate change is a non-stationary process. That means that the past is a poor predictor for the future. And there's abundant evidence of that globally, that there are lots of strange events that are occurring now that are really without precedence, and we can expect more to occur. But I think in Suresh's presentation, we saw many other evidence aspects of non-stationarity too. There is no precedence in India's history to have 53 cities that have 1 million or more inhabitants. That's a powerful combination of demography and urbanization. And we also see political systems themselves as a kind of new non-stationary component. So how do we get beyond that? How do we get away from this kind of fixed, very often very narrow and limited approach? I would say over the last 10 to 12 years, there's been a real shift and emphasis in trying to think about bottom-up decision-making. And this reverses many of the roles in some dramatic ways. Maybe the most important is having the technical analyst. Many of you, I understand, that are here are in engineering schools or programs, actually become very involved with users and stakeholders at the beginning of a process, and try to develop a sense of shared vision of what are the problems, what does success and failure really look like, and try to define that problem or need. A citizens group or an NGO is probably going to define the problem or need in very general terms. And the analyst needs to be able to translate it into quantitative terms, into really the language of engineering and economics for water. Then instead of developing a single solution, try to develop a range of solutions, a basket of solutions. These can be compared, ranked, based on their suitability against different types of climate impacts that we think could happen, that are happening. And the decision maker, of course, is absolutely critical, but the decision maker's criteria is going to be often quite different than that of the users and stakeholders. Trying to think about maybe the cost or the political suitability of different solutions. And what we also start to see now, and I think we're going to, this is going to come up in some of the other talks later today, is the decision makers are not just picking a single solution anymore. They're thinking about overlapping solutions or even staging solutions. So beginning here, then gradually adding another one and then another one. And this is a very big transition. It's really about environmental governance. It's about trying to bring really quite different and new criteria to the decision-making process. In many ways, it's trying to say, I believe, from saying that climate change is a threat, not of floods and droughts, but of how we incorporate uncertainty and dynamic adaptive management over time. Now, bottom-up pathways have been actively translated into decision support systems for water decision-making in a number of areas and by a number of institutions. On the left is a publication that came out in 2015 It was supported by Agua at the World Bank, by Patrick Ray and Casey Brown, two North American engineers. This is the World Bank has a very large water investment portfolio. It's around 25 billion US. This is a very powerful and excellent approach. It's been used in a very wide range of cases. The largest single application that I'm aware of is probably in Mexico City, a mega city of around 25 million in North America, and it's a kind of a massive project. Maybe that'll come up in the discussion. It's a very interesting project, a water scarcity issue, largely an environmental justice issue. I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about CRIDA, which is climate risk informed decision analysis. Ott and I are two of the lead authors on CRIDA. It was published by UNESCO in 2018, and you can download that at the URL that's listed here. So CRIDA, I believe, represents a pretty dramatic shift from how we have thought about water decision making, and tries to take the broad concept of bottom-up decision making and make it into more of a recipe of a defined process that we can follow. It begins on the left with that technical analyst, someone like yourself in the audience, that is engaging with stakeholders, trying to develop a shared vision. What is it that's possible? Not just what we're responding to, but what's possible in this place. What does resilience really look like in the city, in the place we're working and living? The technical analyst then tries to translate that into traditional engineering and economic language, that of performance indicators. How do we specifically measure success and failure? You can tell, even though this is not a climate project, even though this is a climate project, we haven't talked about climate scenarios, climate models yet. Those performance indicators are then confronted with climate data in the form of stress tests, often through a scenario neutral process. Ott will be talking about that, I'm sure. And then we try to develop two types of solutions. Robust solutions, that is, solutions that we have high confidence that they either they're responding to impacts that we can see already, or that we're pretty sure are going to happen in the future. And then flexible solutions. And this deals with the residual uncertainty. There are lots of climate impacts that we are pretty sure will continue on. Sea level rise is an excellent example. The continued loss of snowpack and glaciers in the Himalayas. But there's lots of uncertainties that we need to be able to address. For instance, say the intense heat days that Karachi is facing now, that are causing deaths and seem to be becoming worse. How do we deal with that residual uncertainty? And the two methodologies that we use that are quite technical are decision scaling for robustness and adaptation pathways for flexibility. Nature-based solutions are also a critical component. We think that they form, in most cases, an outgrowth of flexibility, and that they should be incorporated. And CRIDA has developed quite a few nature-based applications along these lines. I'm going to give just some quick snapshots. From Zambia, one of the very first CRIDA projects is in the capital city of Lusaka. What's interesting here is that the risk analysis showed in the city's reservoir, shown here in the photograph, that the biggest climate impact was not actually in terms of the quantity of water there or the precipitation. It actually was from the energy system, and the energy source is hydropower. It comes from a very large dam, one of the largest in the world, that's on a transboundary river, the Zambezi. And that hydropower dam, especially in the dry season, may only operate at 5% or so of capacity. the climate impacts there have been so severe in terms of its storage ability. And so the gaps that we're having in Lusaka were really energy, water energy gaps. And trying to disconnect from that system to provide a climate independent system was really important. An example from the US, this is from the state of California. I'm currently in the state of Oregon, to the north of California. This is a very interesting example in a river valley. It's densely populated, a lot of agriculture, some smaller cities that are there. And the system that's happening, the climate impacts that are happening in this valley are actually not unlike what you see in northern India and Nepal. Traditionally, most of the water that's stored is actually in terms of snowpack in our mountain range called the Sierra Nevada. As that snowpack has disappeared, it's become much more irregular. There has been the dry season has become much drier. At the same time, the wet season has experienced far more flooding. The CRIDA application in this case, that's been led by the state government, has been to be able to create localized managed aquifer recharge zones, often on private lands, privately owned lands. So it's in effect a shift of water storage from one nature-based solution, mountain snowpack, into another nature-based solution, into groundwater systems, all through a passive process, reducing flood risk at the same time that they're reducing drought risk. It's a very creative, very interesting solution that I've been trying to follow closely. And then here's a quick example from Southeast Asia, from Thailand. UDON is the second largest city in Thailand. It's smaller than Bangkok. It's up on close to the border. It serves as a major trade and transport hub, especially with China, and has experienced quite a few significant climate impacts just in the past few years. It has increasing urban stormwater. There's also, of course, a lot of hydropower that's just in the area. In many cases, they've come close to also running out of water in their storage systems, and as well as the run of the river systems. And much of the agriculture there is in intense irrigation systems. So exactly when the farmers need water is often when the hydropower most needs water. And so being able to negotiate those trade-offs is actually becoming more painful. And lastly, the people in the city are, I think this may be one of the most important points. They sense that they're changing, that their economic rate of change is, if anything, is accelerating. And they don't like what they see if their future looks like Bangkok. They want to look like something else. They want to make sure that the city stays a nice place to live in decades from now, that their kids, their children, their grandchildren will want to stay in Udon Thani going forward. The mayor, this is the mayor here, he's taken what I think of as a very progressive approach, a very open kind of stakeholder a definition of the problems that Udon Thani is facing. And very interestingly, he said that these issues around urban stormwater, around hydropower, water supply, irrigation water supply, and the urban quality of life, they're actually all the same problem. That traditionally we would have treated these as isolated issues, different ministries, different sectors. But he said these are all the same problem and they're connected by water. This idea of trying to bring these issues together is quite powerful. In this case, CRIDA was used to look at the growth in the climate stressors. And the outcome has been to develop a series of new urban lakes. It's a very powerful nature-based solution, thinking about flood risk reduction directly in the city, but it's also storage for both the hydropower and the irrigation. On the left here is a map of actually how the city is beginning to look. They've been very actively developing these lakes. You can see the network of of canals and lakes that have been established in the city. It's quite beautiful. So they've created these lakes. They provide green space and flood storage, irrigation, livelihoods, actively used by the residents of the city. And it's also have been able to reduce very effectively the competition for hydropower and irrigation water supplies. There's a link down at the bottom that you can follow later that goes into some more detail about what's been done there. And I like to think of this almost as a kind of deep resilience idea, because it's such an encompassing approach. Lastly, something that if you, in my emails and the last slide, if you would like to reach out with UNESCO and other partners, we've produced quite a course. It's an online course. We have been doing workshops in many parts of the world. Ott and I were, I think the last time that he and I may have been together was in Stellenbosch in South Africa, doing a Crider workshop together. Others have been in many other places, but with COVID-19, we've tried to shift to an online system. The first online course launched last November with over 700 users from more than 60 countries. Many of those initially came from Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean. We're hoping to relaunch that in some other languages quite soon. Again, if you email me, then we'll be able to connect you and let you know when the next course takes place. Thank you very much. Hope that you'll reach out. My email is listed here, and our websites, our podcast, and so on are here as well. I'm really grateful for your time.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. And we do have series of online courses, and I would discuss with you how possibly we could collaborate and offer this under the School of Water and Waste. And let's see that. I would request all the participants to put their questions if they have in Q&A. I can pick some questions from there before I go to Ed's presentation, maybe one or two. Otherwise, we'll lose the traction. So, John, I would like to take a question, and this is from Sampath Rajkumar, and he's asking that is participatory watershed management approach we follow a mixture of bottom-up and top-down approach. Top-down when we physically treat the catchment, but bottom-up when we involve the community and stakeholders. Would like to know your views.
It's a very good question, and I think most participatory processes we have to do them, right? I think one of the things that we see in many water institutions is they've learned that if they don't include a participatory component, then they actually risk the long-term success of the project. I would say a bottom-up approach is probably distinguished most by when that participatory process happens. Is it isolated? Is it at the end? Or is it near the beginning? And perhaps even a kind of continuous evolving process. I think that's probably the largest distinguishing component. It's really who defines your problem, and yeah, hopefully it's the community is actively involved in that process.
Okay, good. So there's a question to both of us, John, and let's try to answer it. I will pick it up from here and read it. Tell me why there are so many institutions in climate resilient urban water security in the developed world. To name a few, IIED, WRI, and all those, but what about in other parts of the world? So do you think you have any answer to this, or?
I think the short answer is that it's a huge problem, and that lots of people are worried about it. As I mentioned right at the beginning, these many of the ways that we manage water, and many of the ways that we think of cities, these are our long-lasting assets. They're long-lasting institutions, and that is a really profound shift. It gives you some idea that in that initial quote that I showed about the World Bank saying, why don't we think about 300 years? What the World Bank typically thinks about is 20 years.
And to add to this, that CSC is not in kind of from a developed world side, but we have been promoting this. We may not use the word urban water resilience or climate resilience. However, we talk about that, how we can increase the adaptive capacity of urban centers to address any uncertainty. And we are pushing nature-based solution over a decade now. And we have documented how historically India had a system of, having resilience, which was part of our traditional wisdom, how we managed our water in different agroclimatic regions. That is what we have been promoting. So I think we have tried to address this issue head on since long, over a decade. In 1996, we published the book Dying Wisdom. We tried to address the issue that things are changing, and we need to adapt to these changes. So I would move on now to the next speaker, and request John, if you can pick up questions from the Q&A and keep answering to the questions. And Ed, can I invite you to Ed Jochen? I hope I have pronounced your name correctly. Apologies if I have not, but 20 minutes from now, and Ed would talk about sustainable urban water management challenges and opportunities. And I'm looking forward to your presentation, Ed.
Thank you, thank you. You pronounced my name very well. Thanks also, John, for your nice introduction talk on CRIDA, because my talk will be on quite a detailed presentation on an application of this CRIDA approach to the flood resilience problem of the city of Guayaquil in Ecuador. I'm expert on climate change adaptation at an institute called THAILAND, which is an independent research institute based in the Netherlands, and we work on many water management and infrastructure issues, delta issues around the world. And we also have a group working on urban resilience, for instance, a collaboration with the C40 and the Resilient City Network. This particular project in Guayaquil in Ecuador has been executed by a group of institutes which THAILAND was leading, and you see the logos here. There was the Technical University of Guayaquil was involved, ESPOL, the Urban Design and Planning Bureau, the Urbanisten were involved, an economic consultant Rebel has been involved, and the project was financed by the municipality and was also executed for the municipality of Guayaquil and by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So Guayaquil is located in an estuary of two rivers in the south of Ecuador, and we have looked at the flood resilience problem not for the full city, though the full city is experiencing more and more often heavy flooding, especially during Niño events. But we have zoomed into this area called Febres Cordero, which is indicated in the red circle in this graph. And this area is both the flood problem is both influenced by the heavy rainfall and the tide in the estuary, and also prone to sea level rise for this reason. So the goal of the project was twofold. It was both a project for the municipality, but at the same time it was also a pilot, innovation project for the CRIDA approach. So one goal is to improve the resilience to floods in the Delta city of Guayaquil. And I think also very similarly to what John showed for UDON, also improving the urban quality of life is one of the major goals as well for the municipality. In addition, on the methodological innovation, we are testing the CRIDA methodology in this environment, and actually I also think for the first time for this urban tide and rainfall induced urban flooding situation. So that are indeed the unique elements of this approach. And in addition, in this project, we combine vulnerability analysis of climate also with a social and economic vulnerability analysis. And very clearly, we try to make use of urban design in the process of developing solutions. So, and here you see the 5 steps of CRIDA, which are aligned along quite traditional planning steps, from setting your decision context, assessing your vulnerability and your risks, then formulating robust and flexible actions that are to be evaluated and institutionalized in the end. And I'm going into more detail on each step in the next slide. So basically, with this CRIDA approach, we try to provide a storyline for decision making for the municipality, how to move from flood vulnerability analysis to a strategic response, in the end to implementing the right measures to alleviate flood resilience and to improve the quality of the urban environment. So in step 1 of CRIDA, the decision context, the problem and the scope of the problem is defined by using a problem tree and defining impact indicators or performance, and then select also performance metrics for doing a stress test to really assess the vulnerability of the area. So that's step 2, the vulnerability and impact analysis. And first, of course, you have to select the main drivers that cause the problem, and also look for what are the plausible ranges of potential climate change and sea level rise and rainfall events. How will they evolve in the future as an input to the stress test? And then, of course, you have to interpret the results of the stress tests. What does it mean for the kind of solutions that and the next steps to take? And of course, in a city landscape in this area, we have been applying this to is about 400,000 people, so quite a large area. So what are the hotspots of piloting the first solutions? So that's in step 3, identifying and selection of the interventions, and also integrate this in the urban design, also connecting to other urban goals and challenges. And then briefly, I will touch upon the evaluation of plan alternatives with the attention to green measures and ecosystem services. And well, probably no time for that, the implementation of selected interventions. But that's also a step that has been taken in this project, with also paying attention to financing opportunities. And I see my colleague Camilo Benitez is also in the audience today. He has been working particularly on this step. So first of all, the decision context. I'm very briefly, what are the elements that have been we went through? First of all, is to identify the key stakeholders. And in this case of Guayaquil, yeah, we looked at what are, we used an approach looking at influence and power of stakeholders, and then we identified the main stakeholders to cooperate with. And we came up with 2 groups. One is the institutional stakeholders, which are the main city government departments. So not only the ones that responsible for the drainage system, but also the ones responsible for traffic and spatial planning and for parks. And the second group was the citizens and businesses in the area. And that this first decision context is also, like John was showing you, also a sort of a visioning step. So also we did questionnaires on what the citizens value most. What are their main objectives for improving the area besides improving flood resilience? And I'll come back to that later. The problem effect tree was designed also together with the stakeholders, where we go from the main drivers, the main conditions, to the problem and the different impacts, material and non-material impacts. And also quite early on in this process, there was a vision that the city was really aiming for green infrastructure measures above all other possible measures, like improving the drainage system, or by installing flood barriers into the reservoir, and that's always the least popular measure in an urban context is zoning and retreat. So basically, also the idea is that these green infrastructure measures yield much more variety of benefits than if you would put all your money in larger drainage pipes under the street level. So the area is quite a large area, as I was saying, so we considered 3 characteristic zones to look at the flood problem. One is the coastal zone, so which is along the edges of the estuary. The second one is what we call the commercial zone, so there are some main streets in the area with commercial activities. And then there is the rest, which is the residential zones of the city. So with the 3 different characteristics, but they all share one characteristic, is that this whole area of the city is completely paved and fully built. So very little space at first sight for implementing, for instance, the lakes that were shown in UDON. Also performance metrics were chosen. So we chose 3 performance metrics, and at first instance they seem pretty technical. So we looked at water depth in the streets, drainage time, so how long will the flood last, and how large area will be affected. These are technical performance metrics, but they can be directly related to the nuisance and the impacts in the area, especially depths. We defined also some critical levels. So 20 centimeters as a level above which water may enter houses and businesses, and higher will also cause material damage inside. Below 20 centimeters, there's just a delay of traffic and less commercial traffic possible in the area. The drainage time is, of course, also important to see how long there will be interruptions of services, and the flood extent is another measure of the extent of the problem. And then we come to step 2, so the vulnerability analysis, which we do by doing a stress test. And for the stress test, this method that John also mentioned, a decision scaling approach was used. And I'll try to explain it here briefly. But more information can be found in the CRIDA manual and also in this decision tree framework document from the World Bank. But what you basically do is to build a model of your urban system, in this case a drainage system, and then increase the stress to the system by increasing precipitation amounts, intensities, and also by increasing tidal levels, and see where these critical thresholds, for instance, this 20 centimeter water depth, in the street is surpassed, what combinations of precipitation and tide. So that's the principle. And then we needed to come up with a specific application of this decision scaling also for this problem of individual events, rainfall events, in combination with tidal levels causing the flooding problem. This hasn't been done before yet. So we were taking an event-based approach. So indeed, looking at individual rainstorms, in combination with tidal levels, and then we looked at what are plausible ranges of this happening in the current climate. So that's the left rectangle here, and then also what return periods belong to these precipitation events. So looking at different return periods from every year to 1 in 100 years. And then we tried to shift this plausible range for the current climate to future climates. And normally you use climate projections in the decision scaling method, but this is very difficult to do in this case, because in these GCMs used for climate projections, you cannot find the combination of these two variables. And especially precipitation as a local level is very bad represented in these GCMs. So we basically looked at, we looked at projections for rainfall intensity, but we also especially looked at science and publications. So what will be plausible shifts in the intensity of precipitation in this area, and of course to sea level rise scenarios to increase the tidal levels.
Can I request you to summarize?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I said 2-3 minutes if you can summarize the findings.
Yes, sure. So we built this drainage model. This was a 1D drainage system model, and we combined it with a urban flooding model, a 2D model, using a digital elevation model as an input. And we used input as a stress test. We looked at tidal levels for both non-Nino and Nino conditions. And we made combinations with design rainfall events. And we took different levels of sea level rise from science, both from the IPCC old range, which is in dark red, and we also took into account some accelerated sea level rise scenarios that may occur when there is rapid melting of Arctic ice sheets. And this was combined as input for the stress test. And then you get these type of plots for the different zones. So we have 3 plots for each zone, one for a 3.5 hour rainfall event, 5 hour rainfall event, and a 12 hour or 18 hour rainfall event, or period, I should say, which is more representative of rainfall during El Nino conditions. So this has been done for each zone. And basically the shifts that we found from literature indicate that the 1 in 25 year rainfall event is a 1 in 10 rainfall event in the future, 2050. So when designing solutions, you should take that into account. So the conclusions from this stress test are that this critical water depths are regularly exceeded between every year and 1 in 10 year, and over 0.4 centimeters less regularly. Precipitation for most of the areas is the predominant driver. Except in this coastal zone, there is also a clear sea influence. But surprisingly, the drainage system is performing quite well until almost 2 to 3 meters sea level, which is almost 0.5 to 1.5 meters more than in the current situation. So there's quite some room still, or resilience in the system itself present. But we also learned that there's also a strong need to improve the knowledge base for this whole system, because the calibration and the quality assurance of this system needs better data to draw strong conclusions. And from the stress tests, we drew 4 different scenarios for designing interventions for the area, and then we looked at hotspots, which were determined by the flooding maps, but also by questionnaires that we used to make an indicator-based vulnerability analysis, both for physical vulnerability, economic vulnerability, and social vulnerability. So these 2 combinations of physical modeling and questionnaires, we identified hotspots, and then, as I said already in the beginning, the preference and also the level of risks discovered in this exercise, and also the confidence we have in this in the analysis, indicate that it's also a good idea to formulate flexible actions for improving the resilience for the city. So these green spatial measures were a good way to do this, and can be seen as a low regret measure for the short term to postpone more drastic measures in the drainage system or in the estuary. So then the designers also came in, and we presented 9 different design alternatives to the stakeholders, from which 3 grand designs were picked and then implemented in the 3 different zones. So this is the plan for the coastal zone, this is the plan for the commercial zone, and for this zone we also had presented 3 different alternatives, from simple to more complex, but also with more benefits. And well, I don't have the time to go into details, but many assets of these plans were also presented, including how much water, of course, can be buffered or stored or retarded by these plans. And then they were evaluated both on effectiveness, and here you can see how a flood is being reduced from left to the right panel by these plans for the 3 different zones. And we also looked at cost and benefits, both so how much damage is avoided by the different plans, but also looking at various ecosystem services that these designs offer. So my last slide. So lessons learned and the way forward is that we see that the CRIDA has really potential for these urban applications, but with some modifications. So it's really important to include preferences from citizens and businesses at an early stage, not only in terms of objectives, but also already in terms of what sort of solutions are desired. And involving citizens, we've learned also with using the questionnaires, also provides an opportunity for additional data collection when there are very little data available on the performance of the drainage system, for instance. The green solutions proposed really fit well in the integrated view of solutions, both in space and in time. So as I said, it's an early stage low regret measure that can be taken and you can postpone more drastic and more expensive solutions with that. Well, also analysis and monitoring should be well integrated in the urban wash management. We found that the responsible departments, they were lacking the right data to really see the problem and also the improvements. And the project really provided a good basis for implementation, which will be taken on in the next steps with the municipality, and also upscaling to other areas of the city. So that's my last slide on this project. I just had this slide that is similar approach with using designers and using water problems as a leverage also to solve other urban issues has also been applied by a consortium of which we were a partner in Chennai in India, but I leave that for another time to talk about that project. So thank you for listening, and if you want
Thank you, Ed.
to ask me questions here, you have the contact details and some links to some software that we use in urban resilience analysis.
Thank you very much, Ed. Very interesting presentation of testing the CREDA and finding that what could be improved upon. So may I take this opportunity to now move on to the discussants who have taken time out to join us. We have John from Water Research Commission, South Africa, and we have Professor Ishrat Islam from Bangladesh. Bangladesh University for Technical, I think you represent the Urban and Regional Planning Department, and you are Professor Islam. So shall I request John, first you go with your intervention and tell us that how do you think CREDA and some climate change related things can, can have relevance to the work, what you do in Water Research Commission? Because South Africa, Cape Town was the first city in the world to go day zero, means to run out of water. So I would like to hear from you. Are there any relevance of this new knowledge? You have to unmute yourself, John.
Okay, sorry about that. Thanks, Suresh, for the opportunity. First of all, I want to start with a disclaimer that I'm not a climate change specialist, but I will actually reflect on what has been going on in South Africa in terms of what we want to achieve, particularly building resilience and adaptation at a local level. I think you all understand that South Africa is a water scarce country, and the impacts of climate change are likely to be more serious in this part of the world, particularly aspects of drought. And recently we have had also our share of floods with a number of cyclones actually being experienced in Southern Africa. So my main concern really as a water services person is to try and build resilience at a local level and try to come up with means and ways from an adaptation point of view. How do we sort of deal with the impacts of climate change at a local level? So as part of that, we have been proactive about these issues over the years. And we have sort of developed a climate change adaptive technologies and approaches for local governments, or in some places they are called municipalities, trying to provide a water sector response at a local level, coming up with a guideline that sort of identify a number of technologies and approaches that can be adapted within the 6 hydroclimatic zones within South Africa, which are likely to experience different impacts as far as climate change is concerned, because in some of the zones, there will be lots of droughts experiences, whereas in some of the zones, there will be lots of flooding, which would impact our capability to provide water services on the ground. So this particular guideline that we have developed sort of articulate the concept of adaptation in providing solutions that can be applied across various geographical settings and the municipal, taking into consideration various municipal capabilities, because we've got municipalities that have got different capabilities, thereby setting the basis for adaptation to be planned and applied where and when it's required. because we anticipate the impacts of climate change to really be felt on the ground at different time frames. So we have structured the guideline in such a way that we have put together a framework of the technologies and approaches that can be applied immediately on a medium term and on a long term as part of intervening to try and build resilience within the local government sector. So in terms of how we are going to take that knowledge forward, we have been engaging the Flanders through our Department of Environmental, Forestry and Fisheries, who are the custodian of climate change programs within South Africa, to try and implement some of these technologies and approaches on the ground in anticipation of trying to deal with the impacts of climate change moving forward. So that's the next step in terms of the projects that we are going to pursue in South Africa. However, there are various stakeholders within South Africa that are conducting research on climate change from different perspectives, from a global change perspective, from a regional perspective. And we still embrace that. We use that knowledge and data to understand the ultimate impact on the ground and use that to plan how to actually promote uptake of these approaches and technologies. I will stop there. Thank you.
I have come across that Water Research Commission has issued some guidelines linking spatial planning and water, basically land use planning and water. So do you think that is a step towards building, ideas and approaches of mainstreaming water sensitivities in urban areas, particularly?
Yes, it's actually part of that. Actually, the approaches and technologies that I'm talking about also feed into the wider scope of water-sensitive design planning. Because water-sensitive urban design planning, it's a strategic project that we started years back. And most of the aspects that have been developed to date have been actually been adopted by a number of cities, City of Cape Town being one of them, and the other metros around the country. And these things, they feed into each other. Of course, the emphasis differs in terms of who is leading a particular aspect, but we always keep track of what the other aspects are trying to achieve so that we can find synergy in what we are trying to drive on the ground.
Do you have any challenges in translating that on the ground?
The adaptation approaches or the water sensitive design principles?
The design, yeah, linking the water to the land use planning or urban planning, because then I would go to Ishrat to talk about, say, because yes. I see there is a very good repository of, you can say policy documents in South Africa, but when you see that the practice on ground, do you see a challenge on that, or because as you have...
Yeah, implementing any new aspects, which normally is a game changer or rather a disruptor of the status quo, is always a challenge within South Africa. And sometimes people will have to push and influence the decision makers and the legislators in terms of how the policy should shift in favor of some of these attractive approaches. So those are the dynamics that we really have to deal with, because sometimes the policy framework that we have really sometimes does not support the science that is on the ground. So we have to find common ground between the two, whereby the science should actually inform the policies and also shift that policy in a direction that actually can benefit society.
Okay, so the political economy of water is also there. So Ishrat, coming from now South Africa, where there was a day zero, and in spite of that, John is saying that they have a struggle to see that the science-based approaches, which would be basically even disruptive approaches, which we are saying. How about Bangladesh, where there is a real issue of climate change and the rising sea levels? And how do you think these kind of tools which are being talked about, do they have opportunities, and what are the challenges? You as a professional urban and regional planner, and I know you have worked on lake revival and integration of lake in urban planning. How do you see these approaches in Bangladesh?
Actually, we all know, those who are working in the climate change field, that Bangladesh is considered as one of the most vulnerable countries due to climate change, though we are not the contributor to greenhouse gas emission. So the unfortunate one, but the thing is the water sector. Bangladesh is a delta low-lying country. The water sector is the most suffering sector due to climate change. And as Suresh already mentioned, same as India, is excess of water and absence of water, the scarcity of water. Both is present in Bangladesh. And the water sector problem, if I look all around Bangladesh, the problem is not similar everywhere because we have coastal cities. They have salinity problem. It's a big problem for them, the scarcity of water and the intrusion of salinity. And in coastal city Chittagong, the city itself, now they inundated every evening for tidal water. And it is getting worse day by day. Even a lot of people have to leave their own houses because of that daily inundation. And if I come to Dhaka, Mr. Suresh, you have already visited Dhaka, and we talked a lot about it, that Dhaka is losing its wetlands and rivers. And you can understand how severe the problem is from one incident that our High Court declared our rivers around Dhaka city as living entity, to consider them as a living entity, because these are encroached, they are polluted. That's why this declaration is. So if I go to two words now, that opportunity and challenges. First, I say the opportunity. Opportunity is that the people of this country, they live with water. They know how to live with water. So we have our indigenous age-long experience how to live with water, how to deal, how to make best use of it in our life and livelihood. And most of our cities are just beside the river to take the advantage of the river for transportation, for irrigation, and all that. And
let me ask you
climate
that.
Change.
Do the institutions responsible for planned approach to address this thing, do they recognize this fact that people know and they should play an important role in the decision making? Is there, because I think Ed was talking about that in the case study, they had involved people from the early stages when they were building scenarios.
That's the most interesting part of Dhaka city. If I give example of Dhaka, that just at the fringe areas of Dhaka, people were living with that annual flooding and everything, and they manage it. So what happened due to the economic force with economic development and all that, the developers, even the government body, though they have a lot of policies and regulation and acts to conserve the water bodies. We have Climate Change Act since 2009, one of the pioneer in the world. And we have Water Development Board, who has a lot of policies. And we have in 2000, we have the act called Conservation of Water Body and Green Areas of Dhaka City. But even though the implementation, as already mentioned by our colleague here, that the implementation is the main challenge. And the challenge where it lies, because it is always top down. So the plan is prepared from the top level. And though we have all the policies and acts, but government take a project like converting the water bodies to urban areas, and the private developers. And the private developers, they are really, really very powerful. It's
Thank you,
a big challenge.
Yeah. Thank you, Ishwar. So, I have also spent 25 years now in this sector, and I've always found that, case studies and projects and all those things good. That I've also said that we have also done an attempt to list the case studies. And I've also read somewhere, that pilots never scale and pilots never fail. So, we do pilot projects, but then how do we get these local things into the policies? For example, in India, I would say in India, we have 8,000 urban centers. And in the new census in 2021, we might end up having 10,000 plus urban centers. But till now, we have only 600 cities which have developed master plans. So a planned approach to address anything. So urban settlements or human settlements are developing just like that. And however, these things are happening, these uncertainties, changes are happening. And somehow, even those 600 master plans which have been made, I'm trying to give the Indian context, are based on the knowledge of 1950s, colonial time understanding of how cities growth happened. But the challenges are of 2050, that where the cities have to go and how would they address, and per capita water availability is decreasing. So we have at the School of Water and Waste put together a series of such pilot projects, and we have put a community of practice. And a lot of people are attending this webinar. And I would like to move on to pick up few questions which have come up in this, that how do you think that those participants who are part of this community of practice of 5,000 plus people, we have this program is also being live streamed. So we would give the statistics later on that who all are there, but I would pick up few questions. And I know I have run out of time, but I would spend 5 minutes to take few questions and before we close the webinar. So can I take few questions? Is anybody raising hand, or I pick up from the question board? Yeah, this is a general question. I don't see it is addressed to any speaker. That how can we assess the impact of flood on agriculture, and then on? Would any of the speaker would like to pick up? How can you assess the impact of flood on agriculture? Okay.
I can jump in a little bit. We've been doing a very interesting project with the UN FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization office in Bangkok over the past year and a half. Often when we think about agriculture and climate change, we think about water scarcity, right? How we need to shift to irrigation, how we need to think about flows, maybe even return waters back into rivers or groundwater recharge. But flooding actually is a significant issue too in many parts of the world, including many parts of Asia and the Pacific. I would say that in general, some of the biggest changes that we face from agriculture is that we assume that what we have been doing in agriculture over the past 10 or 20, even past 100 years is exactly what we need to keep doing in the same places at the same times. Some of the slides that you showed, Suresh, were actually, I think, very revealing in terms of shifts in precipitation timing, the Indian monsoon, the intensity of precipitation over time. These are actually quite practical problems at a local scale. They may mean that we can buffer some of those changes, say building some disaster risk management issues, but we may also need to move or shift some of the approaches. In the Sundarbans, for instance, there was a project that you and I were involved in a decade ago, at the Indian Sundarbans, with the increase in coastal flooding for rice paddy agriculture. And one of the really big shifts that happened in that case was to actually change the variety of rice that was being grown to one that was saline resistant. So when there was overtopping that occurred from coastal flooding, all the plants did not die immediately. And these kinds of solutions are starting to emerge in many areas.
I'll take one question, right, which is to all of us, I think, the speakers, discussants, and the organizers. It is by Debashrita Tripathi. And the question is that irrespective of the awareness about shortage of water, water is still being wasted at a faster rate. Can you suggest any more solutions to reduce the water loss and what we face on day-to-day basis? Though we keep on talking about climate change and all those big things, but I think we need to pick this question. I wanted to say that, would anyone of would you like to address this? Cape Town, where the issue was day zero, do you think that kind of awareness is there, or in Bangladesh where we saw? So would anybody would like to take a call on this? What can be done to address the issue of waterscape?
I'll give a very short answer. I'm sure others will want to jump in too, but I think Cape Town is an excellent example. Cape Town viewed their water scarcity issues. They were experiencing an 800-year drought. It was a quite extensive drought. Climate change was clearly a part of it, but there were also many other components to the problem too, including poor water usage, very wasteful water usage in some cases, and they treated it as not a solution. Sorry, as a problem that had one solution, but as a problem that had dozens of solutions, and some of those they were short term, and some of them were longer term. Often, say dealing with water transport solutions that involves new infrastructure in many cases, or updating infrastructure, and it can take several years to prepare those kinds of projects. So dividing it into acute and kind of long-term system level change is actually a really important a strategy that often needs to be done early. So trying to sequence a problem out over time.
Good. There's one question which I want to pick, which always comes in when we talk about nature-based solutions, that the land in urban areas is premium, and in short, that is usually the reason being given, saying nature-based solutions should not be picked up. How do you deal with, or how do you rope in builder mafia into the solutions approach? What you are saying, does CREDA or any such solution take care of those people who encroach upon? Because in global south, the issues are very common. So how do you think that this unplanned development and all those things, the builder mafia can be addressed? Do you have anything in CREDA which takes care of?
Maybe I can give it a try. I don't think that's particularly something for methodological approaches CREDA to solve, but CREDA can help. And like I said, when you involve stakeholders and also the private property owners within an area in the sessions to think about solutions using maps, and then often it seems there is more space available than you think. Often public authorities don't think on terms of private property. It can also be helpful, and at least it can be a start of a discussion. If for instance, schools or business parking lots, etc. And one thing that also struck me in Guayaquil, everything was fully built and paved, but it was a typical American city with very wide roads that are, so there's also a lot of space within the roads and sidewalks that can be used. But it's only, of course, suitable for one particular type of solution.
So my submission, I have worked in this area of urban planning and design. I would say some of these answers can be addressed by local area planning. The approaches in global south, even if there is something to do with planned urban development, is largely top down, and they are only master plans, and never zonal plans or ward level plans or local area plans are made. So some of these issues, when you start making local area plans involving communities, though the framework exists, but they have not been brought down to that level that you start planning with people, and including those ideas and scenarios with people which you presented. So the frameworks exist in the Town and Country Planning Acts. However, there is no mechanism. There is government which prepares master plan. There is no governance. Basically, there are no frameworks for involving communities from the early stages, from the plan making stages. I think
I'd like to add two more points here, just to give me time. One is that it is a culture, I think, in global south, that investment in land. Whenever we have money, we want to invest in land. It is thought that the safe investment. Good. So taxation policies can work here, because the way we are converting our water bodies and our natural resource areas to urban residential plots, it's not actually solving our housing problem for the poor people. It's not like that, most of the cases. And taxation policy, I think it can work to like discourage people to buy more and more plots and invest in there.
Sure. Thank you, Ishrat. Yeah. But I would like to say that CSC has undertaken a quick study of, master plans and the cities where the master plans were there. And we have found that within the planned areas, there is 40 to 50% open spaces available where you can do innovation in practice by urban design and planning. And you could do these nature-based solutions. These are open spaces which are available, so which could be redesigned. And we could still, without tinkering with the, existing planning norms and standards, you could still do nature-based solutions across.
Which is in planning
yeah.
with nature. This concept is not very.
So if any participant is interested, they can visit CSC website www.cscindia.org for these reports where we have prepared roadmaps. So I would like to take this call as moderator and the anchor for this webinar to say thanks to all the participants who have spared time, the eminent speakers, John and Ed, and the discussants, John and Ishrat, for joining us today and sharing their experience. And I would certainly like to tell to John and Ed that we are interested to explore possibilities that how we could run these CREDA courses and see that how they can be contextualized to India and Global South. School of Water and Waste would like to give a try with one round of this course. And I would like to thank my team who has worked with the partners to organize this webinar. And I think it was a great success because I see that a lot of interest has been shown. People who were able to attend, thank you very much. People who have not been able to attend, but they showed interest, we will send them a copy of the recordings and share the presentation, which will be available on the website. The question and answers which have come in, we would collect them together and also have replies if they are addressed to respective speakers or discussants, and we will get back to you with answers if there are questions. We will summarize them and we get back to all the registered participants. So thank you very much once and all for all my team members who have worked day and night to make this success. And thank you, John. We have talked about this over 3 months. Finally, we were able to do this webinar, and let us see how we can take this forward. And School of Water and Waste at CSC is very interested. And Ishrat, I would like to connect with you. And John, I'm having the discussions next week with Water Research Commission to explore that can we run this in South Africa also, one pilot basis training program on testing of CREDA on grounds in the cities where we are pushing for water sensitive design and planning. Thank you very much. Good night. Have a good evening. Bye for now. And stay safe and take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Suresh. Bye.